I, 45M, never thought I'd be writing this, but I feel like I need to get this off my chest. Last week was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, my wedding day. Instead, it turned into a nightmare because of my family's betrayal and my own actions. I'm still trying to process everything that happened, and I'm not sure if I did the right thing. Here's the whole story. 6 years ago, I was in a relationship with a woman I thought was the love of my life. We had been together for about 2 years, and I was seriously considering proposing. She, 32 farads, was everything I thought I wanted. Beautiful, smart, and we seemed to share the same values. Or so I thought. One day, I stumbled upon some text messages on her phone. I wasn't snooping, I swear. She had asked me to check something for her while she was in the shower, and that's when I saw them. Messages between her and my younger brother, 40M. At first, I thought it was just some innocent family chat. But as I read more, my heart sank. They were talking about meeting up, about how much they missed each other, and, well, let's just say it was clear they were more than friends. I confronted her as soon as she got out of the shower. She denied it at first, tried to gaslight me into thinking I was paranoid. But when I showed her the messages, she broke down. Turns out, she and my brother had been having an affair for months. Months, right under my nose. I was devastated. Not only had my girlfriend cheated on me, but it was with my own brother. The two people I trusted most in the world had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I ended things with her on the spot and told her to get out of my life. But that wasn't the end of it. When I confronted my brother, he tried to justify it. He said they had fallen in love and couldn't help their feelings. Can you believe that? As if that made it okay somehow. I told him he was dead to me and that I never wanted to see him again. You'd think my parents would be on my side, right? Wrong. They were disappointed in my brother, sure, but they kept pushing me to forgive him. He's your brother, they'd say. Family is the most important thing, but to me, trust and loyalty are the most important things, and both my brother and my parents had shown they didn't understand that. I cut ties with all of them. It was hard, but I knew I couldn't have people like that in my life. For the next few years, I focused on myself. I threw myself into my work, started therapy to deal with the trust issues this whole mess had given me, and slowly started to rebuild my life. Then, about 2 years ago, I met my now wife, 39 farads. She was different from anyone I'd ever met. Kind, understanding, and patient. She knew about my past and the issues with my family, and she never pushed me to reconnect with them. With her, I finally felt like I could trust someone again. When I proposed to her, it was the happiest moment of my life. We started planning our wedding, and I was excited about starting this new chapter. I didn't invite my parents or my brother, of course. As far as I was concerned, they weren't a part of my life anymore. I did, however, let my parents know about the wedding, not because I wanted them there, but because I knew they'd find out eventually, and I wanted to avoid any drama. I made it clear that they weren't invited, and neither was my brother. They tried to argue, of course. My mother cried. My father lectured me about family. But I stood my ground. The day of the wedding arrived, and everything was perfect. My wife looked beautiful, our friends were all there to support us, and I felt like I was finally getting the happy ending I deserved. That is, until my best man came running up to me just before the ceremony was about to start. "Your parents are here," he said, looking worried. "And they brought your brother and his wife." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. How dare they? How dare they show up uninvited and bring my brother of all people? I was furious. I told my best man to get them to leave, but apparently they were refusing to budge. I called my father, barely able to contain my anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I hissed into the phone. "Son, it's your wedding day," he said, as if that explained everything. "We're your family. We should be here." "I made it clear you weren't invited," I said. "Especially not him. It's been 6 years," my father argued. "Don't you think it's time to let bygones be bygones? Your brother is sorry for what he did. He's married now. His wife is pregnant. Can't we just be a family again?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Did they really think they could just show up and everything would be forgiven? That I'd welcome them with open arms? Get out, I said. All of you. Get out now, or I'll have security remove you. Don't be dramatic, my father said. We're already here. Just let us stay for the ceremony, for your mother's sake, if nothing else. I was about to lose it completely when my wife appeared at my side. She'd overheard part of the conversation and could see how upset I was. What's going on? She asked, concern etched on her face. I explained the situation to her, expecting her to be as angry as I was. But my wife, always the voice of reason, suggested a compromise. Let them stay for the ceremony, she said. It's not worth causing a scene and ruining our day. We don't have to interact with them. After the ceremony, they can leave. I didn't like it, but I could see her point. The last thing I wanted was for our wedding to be remembered for a family brawl. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. The ceremony went ahead as planned. I tried to focus on my wife, on our vows, on the love we were declaring for each other. But I couldn't help being hyper-aware of my family sitting in the back rows. My brother, looking uncomfortable, his wife, visibly pregnant, my mother, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, my father, sitting stiffly with a forced smile on his face. After the ceremony, as everyone was mingling and congratulating us, I saw my parents making their way towards us. I tensed up, ready for a confrontation. But before they could reach us, my best man intercepted them, reminding them of the agreement that they would leave after the ceremony. I watched as they argued quietly, my mother gesticulating wildly, my father looking stern. Finally, they turned and left, my brother and his wife trailing behind them. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking the worst was over. But then came the speeches. My best man gave a heartfelt toast, talking about our friendship and how happy he was for us. A few other friends spoke, sharing funny stories and well wishes. And then, fueled by a mixture of anger, champagne, and a desire for revenge, I decided to make an impromptu speech of my own. I stood up, clinking my glass for attention. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I could see my wife looking at me quizzically, probably wondering what I was doing, since we hadn't planned for me to make a speech. I'd like to make a toast, I said, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside me. To my brother. A murmur went through the crowd. Those who knew my history with my brother looked confused. Those who didn't probably thought this was a nice gesture. My brother isn't here today, I continued, but I'd like to thank him all the same. You see, if it wasn't for him, I might never have met my wife. I paused, taking a sip of champagne and surveying the room. My parents and brother, who had been in the process of leaving, had stopped in their tracks. They were staring at me, a mixture of hope and fear on their faces. 6 years ago, my brother did me a huge favor, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. He showed me exactly the kind of person he is by having an affair with my girlfriend. The room went deadly silent. I could see the shock on people's faces, the discomfort, but I couldn't stop. Years of pent-up anger and hurt were pouring out of me. That betrayal taught me a lot, I continued. It taught me that the people you trust the most can hurt you the deepest. It taught me that family doesn't always mean loyalty or love. And most importantly, it set me on the path that led me to my wife. I turned to look at her, seeing the concern in her eyes. But I was too far gone to stop now. So thank you, brother, I said, raising my glass. Thank you for showing me what true betrayal looks like. Thank you for teaching me that blood isn't always thicker than water. And thank you for being such a monumental screw-up that it made me work on myself, made me become a better person, a person worthy of someone as amazing as my wife. I drained my glass and set it down hard on the table. Oh, and Mom and Dad, thanks for showing up uninvited and bringing him along. It gave me the perfect opportunity to let everyone know exactly what kind of family I come from. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see my brother's wife looking at him in shock and disgust. My parents looked like they'd been slapped, and my brother, well, he couldn't even look up from the floor. They left quickly after that, my brother's wife practically dragging him out. My parents followed, my mother in tears, my father red-faced with anger or embarrassment. I couldn't tell which. As the door closed behind them, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. But it was quickly replaced by a new one as I turned to face the stunned crowd of our wedding guests. My wife was the first to break the silence. "I think we could all use another drink," she said, gesturing to the waiters. And just like that, the spell was broken. People started talking again, though I could hear my name being whispered all around the room. My wife pulled me aside, her face a mixture of concern and disappointment. "Was that really necessary?" she asked. I deflated a bit, the adrenaline leaving my system. "I'm sorry," I said. I couldn't let them get away with showing up like that, trying to play happy families after everything they've done." She sighed, squeezing my hand. "I understand," she said, "but this was supposed to be our day. About us, our future, not about your past." She was right, of course. In my anger, I'd made our wedding about my family drama instead of our love. I felt a twinge of regret, but it was overshadowed by the relief of finally having said my piece. The rest of the reception was a bit of a blur. People kept coming up to me, some offering support, others clearly uncomfortable. I tried to steer conversations back to happier topics, but I could tell that my outburst had cast a shadow over the event. It wasn't until later that night, when my wife and I were finally alone in our hotel room, that the full impact of what I'd done hit me. "I'm so sorry," I said, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. "I ruined our wedding day." My wife sat next to me, taking my hand in hers. "You didn't ruin it," she said softly. "It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that's what matters." I looked at her, marveling at her understanding and forgiveness. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" I asked. She smiled, but then her expression turned serious. "I love you," she said, "and I'm on your side, always. But what you did today, it's going to have consequences. Are you prepared for that?" I nodded slowly. "I think so," I said. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together, right?" "Always," she replied, leaning in to kiss me. As we settled into bed that night, I couldn't help but wonder what those consequences might be. I'd publicly humiliated my family, aired our dirty laundry for all to see. Part of me felt justified. They'd brought it on themselves by showing up uninvited. But another part of me worried about the fallout. Would my brother's marriage survive this revelation? Would my parents ever speak to me again? And how would this affect my wife? She'd been nothing but supportive, but I knew this wasn't what she'd signed up for when she agreed to marry me. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a silent promise to myself and to my wife. Whatever happened next, I would face it head on. No more running from my past. No more letting my family's actions control my life. From now on, it would be about our future, mine and my wife's. Little did I know, the drama was far from over. The next few weeks would bring revelations and confrontations I never saw coming. But that's a story for another time. For now, I'm left wondering, did I do the right thing? Was publicly shaming my family justified, or did I stoop to their level? And most importantly, how do I move forward from here? If you've made it this far, thank you for reading. Any advice or perspectives would be appreciated. I feel like I'm at a crossroads, and I'm not sure which way to turn. Update 1. It's been a week since the wedding fiasco, and just when I thought things might calm down, life threw another curveball at me. Yesterday, I received a call from my brother's wife, 35 feuds. Her voice was shaky when she spoke. "I know this is out of the blue, but I need to talk to you. In person, if possible. There are things I need to know, and I think you're the only one who can give me honest answers." I was stunned. My mind raced, trying to figure out what she could possibly want to talk about. Then it hit me, the wedding. My speech, the revelation about my brother's affair. I told her I'd think about it and get back to her. As soon as I hung up, I went to find my wife. She was in our home office, working on some papers. One look at my face, and she knew something was up. I explained the situation to her, half expecting her to tell me to stay out of it. But my wife, as always, surprised me. "I think you should meet with her," she said after a moment of thought. "Look, What's done is done. We can't change that. But this woman, your brother's wife, she's innocent in all this. And now she's caught in the middle of a mess she didn't create. If you can give her some closure, don't you think you should? I knew she was right. As much as I wanted to wash my hands of the whole situation, I couldn't ignore the fact that my actions at the wedding had likely turned this woman's life upside down. And she was pregnant, for crying out loud. The stress of all this couldn't be good for her or the baby. So, I called my brother's wife back and arranged to meet her at a quiet cafe the next day. My wife agreed to come with me for support. When my brother's wife walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked tired and drawn. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying. My heart sank. I'd done this to her. As she got closer, I could see that her pregnancy was even further along than I'd realized. She must have been in her third trimester. Another wave of guilt washed over me. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as she eased herself into the chair across from us. "I need to know everything. From the beginning. I need to understand what happened between your brother and your ex-girlfriend. When it started. How long it went on. Everything." I took a deep breath and told her everything. How I'd found the messages on my ex's phone. How I'd confronted them both. How they'd tried to justify it by saying they'd fallen in love. How my parents had pushed for forgiveness, and how I'd cut ties with all of them instead. As I spoke, I watched her face carefully. She remained mostly impassive, but I could see the pain in her eyes, the slight trembling of her lower lip. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "And you're sure, you're absolutely certain it was him?" "Yes," I said softly. "I'm sorry, but I'm certain." She nodded slowly, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her swollen belly. He told me it was all a misunderstanding, that you had feelings for his girlfriend and couldn't accept that she chose him. That's why you cut ties with the family." I felt a surge of anger. Of course, he'd lied to her. Why had I expected anything different? "I'm sorry," I said again, not knowing what else to say. She shook her head. "Don't be. It's not your fault. I don't know what to do now. We're having a baby in a few weeks. How am I supposed to trust him? How can I raise a child with someone who could do this?" My wife spoke up gently. "I don't have any easy answers, but I want you to know that you're not alone. If you need support, in any way, we're here for you." My brother's wife looked at her, surprise evident on her face. "Why, you don't even know me." "Because it's the right thing to do," my wife replied simply. "And because that baby is family, regardless of what's happened between the adults." I nodded in agreement, feeling a surge of love and pride for my wife. She was right, of course. Whatever issues I had with my brother, they shouldn't extend to his child, my niece or nephew. "Thank you," my brother's wife said, her voice choked with emotion. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but knowing I have support, it means a lot." We talked for a while longer, exchanging contact information and making tentative plans to stay in touch. As she was getting ready to leave, she paused, looking at me intently. "I understand why you did what you did at the wedding," she said. "I'm not saying it was right, but I understand. And in a way, I'm grateful. At least now, I know the truth." On the drive home, we were both lost in our thoughts. Finally, my wife spoke up. "Are you okay?" she asked. I sighed. "I don't know. I feel guilty for causing her pain, but at the same time, I'm glad the truth is out." "Is that terrible of me?" My wife shook her head. "It's human. This whole situation is messy and complicated. There are no clear right or wrong answers." She was right, of course, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. My brother's wife now knew the truth, but what would she do with that information? Would she confront my brother? Leave him? And what about the baby? I realized that my actions at the wedding had set off a chain of events that I couldn't control. All I could do now was try to be there for the innocent parties caught in the crossfire, starting with my brother's wife and their unborn child. As we entered our home, I turned to my wife. "Thank you," I said, "for being here with me, for supporting me through all this." She smiled and kissed me softly. "Always," she replied. "We're a team, remember?" I nodded, feeling grateful for her unwavering support. Whatever came next, at least I knew I wouldn't have to face it alone. But as I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I couldn't help but wonder, what would tomorrow bring, and how many more lives would be affected by the truth I'd unleashed? Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since my last update, and the situation has developed significantly. I'm still processing everything, but I feel compelled to share what's happened. As I mentioned before, my brother's wife reached out to me, seeking the truth about what happened between my brother and my ex-girlfriend 6 years ago. We met, and I told her everything. It was a difficult conversation, to say the least. After a week of silence, she called me again, her voice shaky and tearful. "Can we meet again?" she asked. I need to talk to someone, and I don't know who else to turn to." My wife and I met her at the same cafe the next day. Her appearance shocked me. She looked even more exhausted than before, with dark circles under her eyes and a pallor that worried me, especially given her advanced pregnancy. As soon as she sat down, she started talking. "I confronted him," she said, her hands shaking. "I told him what you'd told me, and I asked him to be honest with me." I held my breath, hoping that maybe my brother had finally decided to come clean. But of course, that was too much to hope for. "He denied everything," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said you were lying, that you've always been jealous of him, and that you're trying to ruin his life. He even suggested that maybe you're the one who had the affair, and you're projecting your guilt onto him." I felt a surge of anger, but my wife silently urged me to let my brother's wife finish. "I didn't believe him," she said, looking up at me with tears in her eyes. "I wanted to, but the way he reacted, it was like he was reading from a script. And when I pressed him for details, he got angry. He's never gotten angry with me before. That's when I knew you were telling the truth." I felt relieved that she believed me, but sad for what this meant for her and her unborn child. "What are you going to do?" my wife asked gently. My brother's wife's hand moved to her belly, a gesture I'd noticed she often made when stressed. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've been thinking about it nonstop, and I don't see how I can stay with him." "Are you considering divorce?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She nodded slowly. "I think I have to. I can't raise a child with someone I can't trust. Someone who can lie so easily, not just to me, but to everyone around him. What kind of example would that set for our baby?" I couldn't argue with her logic. If anything, I admired her strength. "Have you talked to a lawyer?" my wife asked. My brother's wife shook her head. "Not yet. I wanted to be sure before I took that step. And I guess I wanted to talk to you first, to make sure I wasn't overreacting." "You're not overreacting," I assured her. "What my brother did, it's a massive breach of trust. And the fact that he's still lying about it, even now, that says a lot about his character." She nodded, wiping away a tear. "I know. I never thought I'd be in this position. Pregnant and considering divorce. It feels like a bad movie plot." My wife reached out and squeezed her hand. "You're not alone in this," she said. "Whatever you decide to do, we're here for you." I nodded in agreement. "Absolutely. And not just for you, but for the baby too. That child is our family, regardless of what happens between you and my brother." We spent the next hour discussing her options. My wife suggested she consult with a lawyer to understand her rights, especially concerning custody of the baby. I offered to help her find a good therapist, someone who could help her work through her emotions and make decisions with a clear head. As our meeting ended, my brother's wife seemed more composed and determined. "I think I know what I need to do," she said. "It's not going to be easy, but I need to do what's best for me and my baby." We hugged her goodbye, promising to check in on her regularly. As we watched her walk away, I felt a mix of emotions: anger at my brother, sadness for her pain, but also relief that the truth was out there. On the drive home, my wife broke the silence. "You know this isn't over, right? Your brother, your parents, they're going to react when they find out she's considering divorce." I sighed. "I know. I'm trying not to think about it. To be honest, we need to be prepared," she continued. "They might try to blame you for this. Are you ready for that?" I thought about it for a moment. Whatever happens, I said, reaching over to take my wife's hand, we'll face it together. Right. She squeezed my hand. Always, she replied. As we pulled into our driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the precipice of something big. My brother's wife was considering divorce. My parents would undoubtedly get involved. And me, I was right in the middle of it all. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was on the right side of things. The truth was out there, and whatever came next, I was ready to face it. With my wife by my side, and the knowledge that we were doing the right thing, I felt stronger than I had in a long time. Still, as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't help but wonder, what would the fallout be? How would my brother react when he realized his wife was seriously considering leaving him? And my parents, whose side would they take this time? I guess only time will tell. But whatever happens, I know one thing for sure. I won't let the truth be buried again. Not this time. Update 3. It's been a month since my last update, and things have taken a dramatic turn. My brother's wife has decided to file for divorce. She called last week to inform me, her voice steady and determined. I've thought about it a lot, she said. I've talked to a lawyer and a therapist. I can't stay in this marriage, not after everything that's happened. I felt relieved she was standing up for herself, but worried about her future. When I expressed concern about her raising the baby alone, she cut me off. I'm sure, she said firmly, I'd rather do this on my own than raise my child in a household built on lies. We both deserve better than that. She's already moved out and is staying with her parents. The divorce papers will be served to my brother soon. 2 days after that call, I got an unexpected call from my father. It was our first conversation since the wedding. Son, he said, sounding tired, we need to talk. Your brother's a mess. He says you're behind all this, that you've been filling his wife's head with lies. I felt my anger rising. They're not lies, Dad. You know what he did. You've always known. There was a long pause before my father spoke again, his voice heavy with emotion. I know. Your mother and we should have handled things differently back then. We were wrong to push you to forgive him. I was stunned. This was the first time either of my parents had admitted they were wrong. My father went on to explain that my brother wasn't handling the situation well. He's been drinking heavily and showed up at their house, ranting about how I've ruined his life. Your mother wants to have a family meeting to try and sort all this out, my father said. Would you consider coming? I was torn. Part of me wanted to refuse, to be done with all the family drama. But another part, one I thought had died years ago, was curious. I'll think about it, I said finally, but I'm not making any promises. After the call, I told my wife about both conversations. She listened carefully, then asked, what are you going to do? I shook my head. I don't know. Part of me wants to just wash my hands of all of this. But another part wants to go to the family meeting? She finished for me. I nodded. To my surprise, she thought I should go. This has been hanging over your head for 6 years, she said. Maybe this is your chance to finally confront it head-on and put it to rest. What if it just makes things worse? I asked. Then at least you'll know you tried, she replied. And whatever happens, I'll be right there with you. So that's where things stand now. My brother's wife is filing for divorce. My brother is spiraling. And I'm considering going to a family meeting that could either heal old wounds or RIP them wide open again. I don't know what's going to happen. Part of me is terrified of facing my family, of confronting all the pain and anger that's been festering for years. But another part of me is hopeful. Maybe that's too strong a word. But I feel like, for the first time in years, there's a chance for real honesty in my family. Whatever happens, I know I have my wife's support, and I know that I'm doing the right thing by standing by the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. I don't know if I'll update again after the family meeting, if I decide to go. But I want to thank everyone who's read these updates and offered support and advice. It's been a difficult journey, but knowing I'm not alone in this has made all the difference. Wish me luck. I have a feeling I'm going to need it.